first go back to what's going on at the national level. I mean, I came back from there a little over a week ago for our Easter break, and it is great to be home and see the kids and the grandkids and come together for an Easter celebration. And so that's now behind us and thinking ahead to the future. But I wanted to describe for you a little bit about what has happened at the Washington level, especially with the economy. We have a downward spiral. We have a recession going on. It's not arguable. The data says so. We are all on the same page on that, and it is an ugly-looking economy. This started a long time ago, and if I were going to go through just to hit some milestones in a short way on things that contributed to the problem, one of them being in 1978 when Congress passed the Community Reinvestment Act. The short version was the lenders had to make bad loans in bad neighborhoods. And then the next thing, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, being the secondary mortgage market, being undercapitalized and underregulated, and they could grow at a very fast pace, and because they had an unfair advantage, the full faith and credit of the American taxpayers were implicitly behind the risks that were being taken by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So that grew this market. And that was some things that took place in the 90s, along with the reinstatement of and a little refreshing of the Community Reinvestment Act. And then we got into the 90s where we had this dot-com bubble. The economy was really booming in the middle of the Clinton administration because technology had figured out how to store and transfer information more effectively than ever before. And the market saw that, and people invested in dot-com companies, but they were let me say, irrationally over-exuberant because they didn't calculate into that being able to store and transfer information would require that you be able to produce more effectively as well. The information that we could do improved our production substantially and our efficiency, but we speculated more than the value actually was. So the dot-com bubble was pierced when their lawsuit was filed against Microsoft, and it deflated towards the end of the Clinton administration and the beginning of the Bush administration. So we have an economy that's in a downward decline. We have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac out there, and the Community Reinvestment Act, and Alan Greenspan that decided that we needed to have a housing boom to fill the hole created by the first dot-com bubble, and he created unnaturally low interest rates, which then the Community Reinvestment Act and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and others accelerated that, and we saw this housing boom that picked up our economy in the aftermath of the burst of the dot-com bubble. But what was going on were bad loans were being made in bad neighborhoods for unnaturally low interest rates, flexible interest rates rather than fixed rates, and adjustable rates. And so people bought in, they built more houses than they needed, they bought more houses than they could afford. They could do it in the short term, and some of them were rolling 2, 3, 4 or more houses. And so we ended up with a lot of speculation in our housing market and an oversupply because we overbuilt. And then I could go through this whole thing with mark-to-market accounting and AIG. But I guess, we're a farm community here. So the mark-to-market accounting, I want to just address that in a way so that everybody understands what happened, how that accelerated the problem. Mark-to-market accounting is where you have to set the values, a lending institution has to set the values on their balance sheet according to what the real markets are of their assets that they hold. Let's just say mortgage-backed securities, say a bundle of maybe 100 home mortgages, and they'll have a value they'll have a rating, and there will be bids on those accordingly. Well, if the bids go up on that bundle of mortgage-backed securities, then you mark that up on your balance sheet on a regular basis, and it spirals upward. Mark-to-market accounting accelerates the capital foundation when you have a growing economy. But when it turns around and goes the other way, you have to mark it down accordingly too, whether you sold or whether you didn't. And it accelerates the downward spiral. Mark-to-market accounting came in 2007 with almost no fanfare. Nobody was too worried about it. They just thought it was a good change to make, and they made it. And we didn't realize, I don't think, what it was going to do to us until just within the last year or a little more. But that mark-to-market economy would be like, let's just say you had all your bins full of corn, and whatever the cash price is today, I don't know. I'll say $4, not quite. So you get your bins full of $4 corn. You put that on your balance sheet at $4 multiplied times your bushel, less a little shrink, and that's what would be there on your financial statement. But if there, and that's fine. But if there were a big flood that came along and washed out all the bridges for the rail and the highways and everything, then nobody's bidding on corn until the bridges are fixed. And so your bid would be zero. And you would have to value that corn in your bins up on the high and dry as zero. That happened with some of the bundles of mortgage-backed securities and other capital investments. There were no bids. They had to mark it to zero. And I know of a bank not too far away out of this neighborhood that had $60 million worth of commercial paper, and there weren't bids on it. And they had to wipe $60 million right out of their balance sheet. So imagine how that spirals downward. And that was what was happening with mark-to-market accounting. We had a lot of things that contributed. It was almost a perfect storm of one thing after another after another. And you really only understand it when you look backwards through it and try to pick out the pieces and then figure out that AIG was insuring these, and no one was looking over AIG's shoulder to determine whether they were real values or whether AIG had the capital to actually pay off if these bundles of mortgage-backed securities turned out to be worth far less. That was all going on, and we had a piece after piece of this. When you look back on it, was wrong. And we had the perfect storm that arranged all those pieces together, and we end up with this big downward spiral. Then, that we had Henry Paulson come to our conference, and in September 19th of last year, said, then Secretary of the Treasury, he said, we have a problem, and I can arrest this problem, maybe, but you need to write me a check for $700 billion. And I need it all. I need it all now, and I can't have any strings attached. And I've been studying this for 13 months, and if you've been only looking at it for 24 hours, whatever idea you have come up with will only make it worse. I'm the only one that has ideas good enough to make it work. Well, so we pushed back on him and said, Secretary, you've asked for $700 billion of the taxpayers' money, and you've stepped out of the financial arena into the political arena, and it just doesn't go like that around this town. So a lot of us said no to him, but in the end, he got about half the Republican votes and probably more than half of the Democrat votes, and he got $700 billion, half up front and the other half to be spent later. A lot of it he didn't spend anyway, and his successor spent. So out of that $700 billion, I don't know how much Henry Paulson spent, but I can tell you with great confidence, substantially more than the majority of it was spent by a Secretary of the Treasury who was named later by a president who was elected later. So we set this plan. We didn't set it. He set it. Clear back in September and early October of last year. Started down this path of $700 billion in bailout. Now, designed to prop up the financial community in Wall Street at the expense of the risk of the taxpayers. And really when we say, how is this going to work? How are we going to measure it? Well, you just have to trust me. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Anybody ever watch Slick Remember? Anybody remember that show? Anyway, it's a kind of a cult following. It's about, he was a slapstick detective on Saturday nights for 30 minutes. And he would say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. And then he would end up falling out of a building, down a chute, rolling out somewhere, and somehow along the way, the criminal would get wiped out, and they would catch him in the end. And even though it was a Rube Goldberg of a contraption of maneuvers, in the end, he would stand up on Saturday night and say, see, I told you, trust me, I knew what I was doing. Now, I didn't have that confidence in Paulson, and I voted no, and so did a lot of the rest of us. But then President Obama was elected. It was really a moment in history to be there to be part of the inauguration on that day on the west side of the Capitol. And I want to express to you that it is a wonderful privilege in this job to be there with that kind of a vantage point to witness that part of history. It was extraordinary. And I put that out there so that all of us, Democrats and Republicans, know at least that we need to appreciate when we reach big milestones in history. And that's a big milestone in our history. And then after that, President Obama came to our caucus just like Henry Paulson did. And this time he said, well, I need $750 billion plus the interest from my economic